Welcome to the Australian Property Investment Podcast with your host, Aaron Christie David. Each episode, we ask an expert to share their key insights for aspiring investors to make confident property choices.
G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Christie David, and what we do with each and every episode is bring in what I call someone that's best in breed, so someone who lives and breathes their trade and knows exactly what they're talking about. And for those that don't know me, my name is Aaron Christie David. I run a mortgage broking business called Atelier Wealth, where we help property investors start out and scale up their property journey. Before we do kick off, I do want to mention that all our chats are general in nature and not intended to give advice. So if you're after advice, please do engage an experienced professional as well. Our guest today says she has over 25 years of experience. I don't believe that because she looks baby-faced as well for a conveyancer. But 25 years, Louise, I'm sure you've seen a lot. So welcome, Louise Willows from Conveyancing One. Welcome.
Thank you, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
Not at all. Thanks for being here. It's exciting, especially when we get someone local. I feel so excited when we have some of our local heroes come on the journey with us as well. And I say that because we've had the privilege of working together a few times. And something that I do want to call out is when you talk about your bio says here that you help clients with a seamless and stress-free experience. That says a lot, because you give clients that sense of confidence and you do aspire to make it as seamless as possible.
Yes, yes, we do. Yeah, it's very stressful conveyancing, so yeah, we strive to give clients that experience.
Yeah, and I mean it's funny because people go, "Oh, hang on, reading a contract to sell," and then here we go. Like in a customer's mind, same with us as mortgage broking. Go, I don't know, just get a loan, and how stressful can it be? But you and I, with all our years of experience, go, here's where things can and will and could go wrong, and that's what we call, I call we're paid for the transfer of stress is effectively what we do, right?
Yes.
So someone's looking to buy a property, they will consider it one of the most stressful things they will do, and we're here for the transfer of stress. That's right. We try to do that without going grey too quickly, which I'm failing at miserably, by the way. Before we do kick off, though, I just want to kind of learn a little bit about yourself, and for our listeners tuning in as well, a bit about yourself and the Louise Willows story, if you can indulge us.
Yes, well, I'm married with 3 children.
Lovely.
Live locally in northern suburbs of Wollongong.
Yep.
And I've got my business, Conveyancing One. We operate from an office in Thirroul and also an office in Engadine. So we predominantly do residential conveyancing, but commercial. I've been in business for 16 plus years.
Yeah. I mean, 16 years, you've probably learnt a lot along the way and probably seen a lot, and that's what I want to get that experience and knowledge out of your head in today's episode in a nutshell, right? And one of the big topics I want to have a chat about is engaging a conveyancer, and I've had conveyancers on previously, and it's one of the questions I do ask, because I guess hearing from multiple conveyancers kind of reiterates it about planning and being organised. So, from your experience, an ideal client experience, when should they be looking to engage you? And the next question to that is, what does that service entail? Like, how many contracts can be reviewed, and what does your service kind of cover?
Well, you should engage a conveyancer when at the beginning of your property search, just at least to get that relationship built and to find out a bit about the process. So you may not have found the property. You may just be beginning your journey, but it's important to engage then.
Yeah.
Once you're going down the road of looking at properties, before you sign anything, you need to contact your conveyancer to get your contract reviewed. Do not sign anything until you have done that, because it's a legally binding document.
Sage advice, but I'm sure people haven't listened to you either.
That's right. Especially properties going to auction.
Yeah.
There's no cooling off at auction, so that's very, very important.
And it's really tough because in a hot market, especially if they're trying to negotiate pre-auction and try and, under the same conditions
That's right.
as well. So they've got to waive their cooling off, and you and I have seen it. Sometimes the hour can make a difference where they've missed out on that property because someone else has gone in and confidently signed a 66W, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it's unfortunate that happens, but it does happen. You can be as organised as anyone and still miss out, and that's really heartbreaking for people. But I think the important thing is to engage early on. Speak to your conveyancer about what they offer. A lot of businesses will offer free contract reviews. Some will charge you for it. So you need all that information up front. It's always very, very important to speak to your mortgage broker. That's a huge thing because you need to get your finances in order.
Spot on.
But the conveyancing comes into reviewing a contract. As I said, it's a legally binding document, so you need someone to look at it before you sign anything.
Yeah. And I guess in a client's mind, and look, we all think we're the only client that anyone has, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So they're going, well, hang on, I've just sent the contract. I haven't heard back from in a little while. It's like, well, hang on, obviously they're reviewing other contracts and getting settlements ready as well, so all in a day's work potentially for yourself. But how long do you, and this is generic because every contract may be slightly different, more complicated, for example, depending on what it is, but how long do you budget or estimate to give a review for a contract and then provide feedback as well?
Well, it all depends, and this is where you need to speak to your conveyancer as to whether the property is going to auction, whether they're taking offers prior to auction or whether it's just a straight private treaty. But generally auctions, they're more important to look at quickly because there's a time limit. But generally ourselves, we usually do 24 hours to contract review.
Yeah, wow. I mean, that's exceptional, right? I mean, that's, you got to think yourself, you're putting yourself in a fairly tight situation for yourself where you've got to give advice on a contract, and that's, again, you're on the hook for that type of advice, like we're on the hook for loan advice as well, right?
Yes. Yeah. But that's the market, and that's what has to happen.
Correct. So from a client, what makes an ideal client? Because, I mean, here we are all the time. Everyone's looking, what makes an ideal conveyancer? But it's almost from your perspective, what makes an ideal client?
Someone who is organised, they know that they're wanting to go for that property, and then they've got their finances in order, they've got pest and building, they want the contract review, they give you reasonable time to have that take place. But I think also going back to when you engage a conveyancer, you need to speak to them to know the process, because a lot of people, first home buyers, people that haven't been in the market for, 20, 30 years, things have changed. So you need to know the process and how it works. Yeah. That's very important.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. I want to kind of switch gears a little bit. And one of the other common questions that we'll get from buyers, especially when we're buying maybe investment properties, is the ownership structure. And that's how people buy property. So, say, for example, myself and my wife Bernadette buy a property, will probably be joint tenants.
That's right.
Yep. And then, say, if I'm buying an investment property maybe with my brother, we might be tenants in common.
That's right.
Yeah. So take us through the distinctions or differences between those two buying entities.
So joint tenants, you own the property jointly.
Yep.
If one of you die, it automatically goes to the survivor, irrespective of what's in your wills.
Okay, yeah.
That's usually what the matrimonial home would be. Yeah. Would be joint tenants. Tenants in common, you own it in specific shares, can be 50-50, 70-30,
Do you give advice about how to split that percentage up? Or
no, you need to speak to your accountant in terms of that. So if you buy tenants in common, you own in specific shares. If one of you die, it goes to whoever is specified in their will, so you can will it away. Yeah. A lot of the time, people as well that second marriages, they have children from previous relationships, they may buy in tenants in common and then get their wills sorted, so it provides for, continued occupation of the property after death. That sort of thing, yeah.
Perfect. And then again, when we go down the path of investments, and some people for, say, land tax purposes or capital gains tax will then look at, say, company and trust.
That's right, yeah.
Purchases as well.
Yeah, so company and trust, definitely you need to engage an accountant because that has tax implications.
And quite often we often have a chat with, say, their financial planner as well, because that then has financial planning
That's right.
its own challenges, right?
Yeah. In terms of companies and trusts, you also have to have that set up before the date of the contract. You can't purchase a property under a cooling off and then change it to a company. Yeah, it doesn't work like that. The entity has to be legal as at the date of the contract. So if you're looking at investment property, you need to speak to your accountant or your financial planner.
And then when you talk about setting up, there's another one that comes up and pops its head up, which is SMSFs.
Yeah.
And, I'll buy a property through my SMSF. Have you got it set up? No. And take us through, because I mean, there's a process behind setting up an SMSF, and again, this is very much an accountant financial planning domain. But from your perspective, it has its own little quirks as well, doesn't it?
It does, yeah, and it does take a long time as well to set up, like a very long time as SMS.
It's costly, time and financially.
That's
to
right.
set up.
Yeah. So you really need to know the tax implications of that before you go down that route.
Yeah, beautiful. No, thanks very much. There's a particular topic that I want to have a chat to you about, and it's not pleasant, but I think that's where good conversations are had. Going, okay, the unpleasantries about buying a property, which is missed settlements. Now, this is something that's come up. We used to pride ourselves on never missing a settlement. I'm not here to beat our chest. I'm pretty sure a lot of brokers and bankers took pride in the fact that they met settlement on time every time, with resources around banks, for example, with clients being stuck at home without a printer was a new challenge. Things taking ages in a mail to then get to a processing centre when loan documents are being signed, all contributed to delayed or missed settlements, which everyone looks forward to settlement day, and then when that gets moved, the whole experience can go up in flames a little bit, and people are super, super disappointed. So I just want to kind of work our way around the purchase and / settlement with different parties and go, from your perspective, what happens here, and what recourse or what options do people have? Yeah.
Okay, so there's a completion date and you have to settle by that date.
Yeah. So we're talking about settlement date. So it's usually, say, New South Wales 6 weeks after the contract
date. Standard,
date.
Yeah. So as a purchaser, if you don't settle by that date, the vendor can charge you penalty interest.
Yeah.
They can also issue a notice to complete, which is a 14-day notice.
And that 14 days includes weekends, right?
That's right. Yeah. If you don't complete by the end of that notice to complete period, the vendor can terminate the contract and keep your deposit. So you don't want to get into that.
Yeah.
You don't even want to get into the penalty interest, because that can be quite substantial. Correct.
And then you look at someone like Queensland, who's different again, I don't know, maybe...
their time of the essence there, so their completion date is you have to settle that date.
On that date, otherwise...
there's no notice to complete. There's no extra 14 days, which, is very unfortunate. But
correct. And we've seen that come up in the media a few times where people have missed out and they've lost the deposit and the property's been unsold, and it doesn't end well. It ends in tears.
That's right. Definitely. Yes.
Which is, it's no laughing matter. But so that if it's a client's fault, and so when you look at the root causes behind why the client hasn't been able to settle on time, maybe it's a bank delay, for example. Maybe a document's gone missing. Bank or broker delay. I've seen that, experienced it firsthand as well. Maybe you go upstream a little bit and the bank was chosen on rate, but the turnaround times are terrible. So it's like, okay, if we're looking to settle on time, then maybe it's not just about the lowest rate, maybe it's about the right turnaround times from that bank.
So, definitely. Well.
That's another one. Or there's something that comes up left field, which is a valuation issue, or the property is not acceptable to a bank, and then they call, we have to go back to square one, resubmit an application, and then you've got to be very careful about how you resubmit applications as well, isn't it? What about if it's the bank's fault? So we've seen this a couple of times where the banks have forgotten to include a document in the loan pack, for example, or the bank's shortfall accounts are being set up, for example. So what happens in that situation from your perspective?
Well, if you're a purchaser and your bank delays settlement because they're not ready, you still incur penalty. You can still incur penalties. It doesn't matter that it's your bank and not you. It's still considered you delaying settlement.
Yeah.
In my experience, 90% of delays are caused by banks. So I always tell clients, sign your mortgage documents a couple of weeks at least before settlement so that there will be no delay. If there is a delay, unfortunately, the vendor can charge you penalties, and you just have to work with the bank to get it all done as quickly as possible. I do actually believe that's where good mortgage brokers come into their own, because they can make that happen really quickly.
Yeah, it's what I call clout. So you kind of go up the chain and you go, this has to settle on time. There's a human being, there's real people at the end of this.
That's right.
And banks can be a little bit detached from that sometimes. Not a pot shot at banks. It's just going, a big bank cannot be across that many individual settlements. That's why people exist like you and I. But then it's knowing what options. And I think from an emotional energy, like we're saying, it's high stress and it's high excitement. Then you get to that day and then the dream gets taken away from you. I mean, our advice is get to settlement. So do whatever you can to get to settlement and then look for blood or look for reimbursements afterwards.
That's right,
for example.
Yeah. Don't look for it beforehand. Settle. Get that. That's the
priorities to get to settlement,
that's
isn't
right,
it? Yeah, great. What happens if it's the other side's fault? So say I'm buying the house, I'm ready to settle, my moving truck's outside the front of my house, I'm ready to rock and roll, pick up the keys from the rest of the agent, and I'm being told, well, actually the vendor's not ready to settle. Yeah,
unfortunately, vendors don't get charged penalties. So the only thing that we can usually do is try and still get the purchaser into the property. But that has to have a reasonably understanding vendor, and that's not always agreed to. So, a lot of those instances, unfortunately, it doesn't end well, and the purchaser just has to wait until settlement takes place to be able to take occupation. But obviously we always try and get a purchaser into the property if it's the vendor fault. I
mean, you play this out in real life. Someone's given notice to move out of their rental on that date to then give the keys back. So settlement's typically on a Friday, which for the record, I don't understand why they're always on Fridays. Why don't we make them Thursdays to have that extra day sometimes, right? So you got the removal's booked for Friday afternoon. So settlements typically take place in the afternoon. Removal's ready to go. I'm waiting for the call from the bank, the broker, or the conveyancer. Settlement's gone through. It doesn't happen, and then we got to Friday afternoon. Got to give the keys back the next day because someone else is now moving into the property the next day. You kind of see they've got nowhere to go with a moving truck that night. So some banks and some vendors, you might say, are lenient. I guess our only advice has been to a lot of people is give yourself a bit of a grace period. Give yourself a couple of days between the settlement and then giving the keys back. That if something goes wrong, you're not left homeless effectively.
That's right,
as well.
Yeah. Definitely if you're in a rental, definitely don't give don't bank on the day of settlement. Most of the time they go through, but there are always problems.
The exceptions to the rule.
Fortunately now we have an electronic settlement system, so usually you would know a couple of days out if there's going to be a problem for settlement, and you can forewarn people,
nice.
And then have a bit of a backup plan. Gone are the days really that you get to settlement and it doesn't happen because it's already been set up in the electronic workspace, which
is beautiful now.
It's fantastic now. That's right.
That's just going to keep getting better and better.
Exactly. Yeah.
Excellent. And then I remember, and this is going back a while, but do you remember the Lint Cafe siege?
Yes. Yeah.
And that's when they used to do paper settlements up on Castlereagh Street, and they locked down the city, and then all bets were off for settlement, and then that led to settlements the next day, and I think it was like right before Christmas. It was Australia's biggest settlement day. It was ginormous. Obviously, an extraordinary, turn of events.
That's right.
But then what happens if it's linked? And I'm not saying that's an only case, but what happens if a settlement falls through and it's a linked settlement? What then happens in those situations as well?
Well, all of them will fail. If it's a chain of settlements, if the first one doesn't settle, usually the rest of them fall over as well. So, which happens as well because a lot of people sell and buy, and then the next people sell and buy, and the next people sell and buy. So linked settlements do fall over, and everyone just has to stay put unless everyone can get agreement to move. But again, Yeah, that was back in the day of paper settlements, and that's gone now. You don't have that anymore. You don't have settlements sitting around a table and handing around checks and papers.
Or checks would go missing in the past as well. That's a classic one.
Or someone's late to settlement, and now it's everything's electronic. So, as I said, nowadays you can usually see there are instances where it does fall over at the last minute, but they're very few now that actually happen like that. So,
perfect. Thanks very much. Let's switch it to a bit of a more positive note, perhaps, and we talk about deposits. So this is again another one at the start when it goes to the contract and getting deposits ready. And so there's two types of deposits will be paid. So one is you go in private treaty. I'm looking to pay a deposit, which is a holding deposit when someone sees you under contract or under offer on a property online, versus at auction, which is the 10% check. And then people go, well, how much do I get this check made out for? I don't know how much I'm buying for. So in your experience, we'll answer the private treaty one first and break down the deposit, and then we'll go to the auction afterwards. So someone's looking to make an offer on a property and they're going to get a cooling off period, which means there's a 0.25% deposit payable.
That's right.
Yeah. So when does that get paid? How does that get paid? Talk us through the mechanics in that.
So the deposit has to be paid before contracts are exchanged.
Yeah.
So there has to be a deposit paid. So you would pay your 0.25%, you'd sign the contract, the contracts would be exchanged, and then your cooling off period would start. Before the end of the cooling off period, you have to pay the balance of the 10% deposit.
Yeah.
That's usually electronic these days. The agent will just give their account details and people will do an EFT transfer. Auctions, the same thing. Excuse me.
Sorry, take a minute.
Auctions are the same thing. You can pay by EFT.
Yeah.
Checks, a lot of people don't usually do checks, but if you wanted to do a bank check, you would just get 10% of your maximum bid.
Yeah.
If you have to up it a bit.
You just top that up from cash, maybe transfer. Yeah.
And if you haven't gone to that, just say it's, $100,000 you've got a check for and the 10% only works out to be $90,000. Well, that's fine. You've just paid an extra bit and it'll be all worked out on settlement.
So, okay. I think the other part that catches some people is when you got to do transfer funds, some banks have a daily limit charge as well, right?
That's right. So before an auction, if it's going to auction, you would get approval from your bank to do a one-off transfer. So you have to speak to your bank before the auction, a few days before, and just make sure that that's in place so you can do that one-off transfer if you're successful at auction. And in terms of cooling off period, you can either go into your bank and get them to transfer the balance of the deposit, or again, you can just ring up and get that approval to do a one-off transfer.
Yeah, great. And then we'll talk about deposits, and sometimes they go into a trust account. So what does that entail, and how does that get managed as well?
So deposits are always held in a trust account. So it's either the real estate agent's trust account or the conveyancer solicitor's trust account.
Yep.
And it's held there until settlement takes place.
Yeah, okay.
So you don't earn interest on deposits, so it just sits there.
Yeah, okay.
That's it. Yeah.
Great. We had one come up recently where we had a client selling their property, and because they were waiting to sell their property, then use all the cash, then go and buy the next one, someone made an offer on their house, if I can explain this clearly, and they wanted to use that deposit to then go towards their next house deposit. Is that allowed?
That's often allowed as long as there's a clause in the contracts.
Yeah,
and a lot of people object to that. A lot of purchasers, conveyancers and solicitors object to that. But it's a hot market and sometimes if you want the property, the clause will remain. So it doesn't get released to the vendor direct. It would go into the real estate agent of their purchase.
Okay.
I would always recommend that will advise for that to be deleted because you do lose a bit of control over the deposits. It's been released.
Yeah, okay.
If something happens and your contract can't be completed for whatever reason and you're entitled to get your deposit back, if it's been released, you're still entitled to get it back, but then you've got to wait for it to come back to you.
Yeah, okay.
So it is safer to stay in the vendor's real estate agent's trust account until settlement and not be released.
Yeah.
But again, as I said, it's a hot market and a lot of people have that in their contracts, that clause in their contracts allowing them to use the deposit. And if it's between a couple of people, if the vendor really needs to use that deposit, they're going to go with the one who agrees to the release.
Yeah, excellent. Something that might, I want to say, controversial, but we'll have plenty of times where a client, again, we talk about a hot market, wants to buy a property and they're not finance approved. Now, I'm going to almost jump the gun and say that your advice is don't sign a contract. Don't sign a contract. And there'll be times where I'm sure that I'm not the only one, a broker or a banker said, well, if you want it, go for it. And I know your borrowing capacity is strong enough for it, or we'll find a way. But I guess from your perspective, so we're looking to do it. Obviously, you're protecting your client's interest as well. So have you seen things go wrong, or does it always end up okay?
Sometimes it ends up okay, but sometimes it doesn't end up okay, especially if you don't have that loan approval. And then if it takes time, you can get into that penalty interest.
Yeah.
And penalty interest is quite expensive these days. Like depending on the price of the property, you could be paying $500 a day for penalties. Plus the stress that it causes people is unbelievable.
Yeah. I think the $500 is a small fee compared to the stress.
That's right.
It feels like
very stressful.
It feels like every hour is a day when you're on the clock, and when banks are 2 or 3 days just to even look at something, that's 2 or 3 days gone, that's $1,500, but it's like, but there's no outcome yet.
That's right.
It's gone to a bank and it's still an outcome pending.
That's right. Yeah. And you could still lose your deposit if the vendor decides to issue a notice to complete. And
at that stage, you've got yourself as the conveyancer, maybe a broker or a banker, and the real estate agent chasing. It's like you're getting hit with all angles.
That's right.
And then the stress of a missed settlement, maybe as a couple or a family.
It is highly stressful. Yeah. That's the same as buying before you sell. If you have to rely on your property being sold to complete your purchase, always advise against that. Because the stress levels are huge. People just don't understand how stressful it is.
Yeah. So take me through, because I mean, most people will go, I'm the eternal optimist. I'm going to buy something before I sell my own home. What's the problem?
Well, sometimes it does work out, and that's fine. But markets go up and down, and if you buy in this market, next week the market might change, and then you can't sell. What are you going to do?
So we always the price that you want, or you thought you had banked on, right?
Or you're forced into accepting a lower offer because
time's of the essence now, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. So I would always advise you have to have a backup, like a bridging finance or beg, borrow and steal from family or something to get you over the line in the event that you can't sell. Yeah,
perfect. I mean, we could keep going. We could have quite a few chats about this, but I think we'll kind of, from a guidance, and that's what we're talking about here. It's not telling people what to do or how to do it. It's just going, look, you've been part of plenty of property purchases and transactions and sales. It's going, well, hang on, lean on that advice and that years of experience to go, if you want this, and I mean, your motto is seamless and stress-free, right, which is very similar to what we hope for our clients' experience too. There are periods where, you cannot sugarcoat it. There are times where it will be stressful.
That's right.
Yeah? When you're going to an auction and you don't know what the price is going to be.
Yeah.
When you're making an offer and you're not sure, have you overpaid, for example, or you just haven't heard back from the bank and it's been 4 days when they said it was going to be 2. They're all stress points.
They are.
But you're not the first person to do it. You might be the last person to do it either. It's kind of what we tell clients, and that can be a healthy reality check sometimes as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Louise, I want to say thank you very much.
Thank you, Aaron.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. It just rolls off the tongue for you because you obviously know what you're doing. You're very, very aware of your trade. So thank you very much for joining us.
No, thank you for having me, Aaron.
Excellent. If you want to get in touch with Louise Willows, we'll include Louise's details in the link below. That's a wrap for another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. We hope you found that helpful. If you have, leave us a review or give some feedback as well. Until next time, take care.